Yeah, I should have it tattooed on my. But yeah, I'm really glad that guys like Husky and HD, they've been able to make a living at it, and that just November 30th. My bad, 30th, 1998. I'm not sure why 13th was sticking out in my head.
Tattooing
But
it on my arm right now.
yeah, I need to make a pencil outline and then go. Anyway, but I'm really glad that they've been able to make a living doing it, and that it's kind of getting, because I feel like, okay, now they're established a little bit, so I'm hoping that the player base will be established and the game itself will be established. And I think that is definitely a big first step, and I definitely feel like them as carriers and voices of the game itself are very strong, and it's very encouraging to just see the demand, and I hope that it continues. And that we just see an increase. And I really don't mind who it is at the top. I have a little people who are like, and they insult Husky and HD, and that really frustrates me and aggravates me, because currently I feel like they are the strongest carrier of the voice. They have the most subscription, them and Day9 really, and to a degree Tasteless and Artosis. Day9 actually, he's kind of the guy I want to thrust to the front mostly. I almost felt like when Day9 started doing his regular dailies, I could retire from StarCraft commentating, and it made me feel very warm and fuzzy, because when I first started commentating, what I really wanted is someone exactly like him, someone who's articulate and someone who's very good at the game, to be around to basically help spectators and newbies out. And once he got there, I'm like, sweet, he's out there. And I don't know, he just gives me warm, fuzzy feeling. And I'm sure as many viewers too, he gives me warm, fuzzy feelings whenever I do it. And also, I think all three of them managed to do what I was talking about earlier. They managed to keep it very, very human to a degree. There's definitely... I'll regularly say there's definitely ways I wish that Husky and HD had done it differently. I feel like and most of that comes with, I feel like when they got started, they were just producing a lot of stuff rather than a lot of stuff with purpose. But they put a lot of hard work in, and I feel like the HDH tournament was absolutely huge, and I thought that was absolutely great. And that's another thing I wish. It's kind of one of those, it's like 6 of one, half a dozen another. I wish they hadn't done that, because I, again, wanted to see the concentration of tournaments rather than the scattering. But at the same time, I'm glad they did it, because it established a lot of viewership at the same time. So I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah, and that's my phone in the background, which I hope someone will answer very soon. Anyway... Yes, I know what you mean, but at the same time, we have to give the game and the scene a bit of slack, I say, because the beta was just a crazy time when people tried to maximize everything, like running around with chickens with their heads cut off, but still managing to get a lot of things done and a lot of good content produced. And now the game in itself, with the full Blizzard support, has only been out for 2 months and some change. And it's important to remember that what we talked about, the old Brood War community, that was, 10 years it had taken to come to that stage. And now we can't really demand of StarCraft 2 to have the same properties when it comes to depth and organization. I think it is important to remember that things are still very much growing at the cellular level, and that... we have to be patient and build things from the ground up. And the Day9, Husky, HD, Tasteless and Artosis over there in the GSL studio, they are our foremost ambassadors to the rest of the world, who are coming into the scene more and more every day, who don't know anything about the legacy and the history, and what they know is what shows up on YouTube when you type in StarCraft. And I think they're doing a very good job, and I think they will be able to do an even better one as time goes on. It's important to remember that such things take time, and the Brood War community, if it had anything, it was a lot of time under its belt.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with everything you said right there, and I don't have anything to add to it, which is why I'm like, oh shoot, now I'm supposed to say something.
No, definitely. It was just one of my long philosophical rants that I tend to overdo. But I thought we could actually spend some time talking about the actual game of StarCraft 2. We've just been philosophizing around it right now. But the gameplay in itself, the latest patch, the 1.1 patch, and I know way before the game was released, you said that what you were looking forward to the most was not so much the game itself, but the commentator tools.
Yes.
The things you can press buttons on and information comes straight to you instead of having to go and click on buildings to see if someone is researching Psystorm and etc. How do you find it now when there's been some patches and some changes, and are there any big imbalances you see? Share the love.
Share the love. Right now, I feel like a lot of people at large still feel that Terran has a sizable advantage. And it's weird because I think what Blizzard is doing, the recent patch, a lot of people are complaining that it didn't really do enough to hurt Terran. There was the slight Reaper nerf, but aside from that, everyone feels like it's kind of a throwaway, which I completely understand. It's a weird situation with Blizzard, though, because I think what they're doing right now is they're waiting to see if there's any player. And it's kind of, that's the problem between StarCraft 2 and Brood War. Is there's a certain stage of Brood War where Blizzard just left it, and they could rely on players to innovate what seemed like imbalances. So you would have things like the Bisu build, but even though that looked dominating and imbalanced, and as though the game was broken for a good period of time, people still figured out ways to take care of that. And I think that's what they're trying to look at and tentatively bounce around. So it's almost, I think they're at the stage where the patches aren't coming out as quickly as the player base wants, but I think it's one of those things where they're trying to look and see if people are actually going to innovate, first of all, and if whether they have to patch it essentially. So I don't know. We'll have to see what happens in that regard. I think part of the other problem with Terran being over-imbalanced is a lot of the new player base is all Terran just because the campaign was Terran, and that naturally happens. I do think they still have an over advantage, but I almost wonder if there are a couple of people just aren't innovating. I don't feel like the anti-air. I feel like Terran are at large kind of vulnerable to air across the mid game, and I haven't seen a lot of exploitation of that. I've seen a lot of people go Phoenix, but not a lot of Phoenix from Protoss play or Void Ray, and I feel like Void Ray is a very nice, strong build against Terran. Even if you aren't successful with it, you still have Void Rays. You still can maintain map control with it. Zerg has a lot more difficulties versus Terran, so I won't get into them. But yeah, I still just saying all that, I still feel like Terran, yes, is the strongest race because of medevacs and mules, really. The mule problem, I think, is the biggest one, because I think what Blizzard was thinking is, they'll have to keep comsatting, and so there'll be a balance, and so they won't be using mules constantly. But most of the time, Terran have figured out a way around that, and they just spam mules nevertheless and figure out other ways to scout and rely on other things along those lines. And as a result, but the mule is just such a huge economic advantage. You can have essentially half the harvester count, or even have all of your harvesters taken out, have a lot of energy into orbital command centers, land them, and dump a whole lot of mules, and you're set. Also, the planetary fortress, I think, is a little bit difficult in that regard. The combination of the planetary fortress and the medevac, and also the bunkers and the medevac, I think, is the medevac gives you a huge degree of mobility. It feels like a counter to a lot of things. Your infantry is already strong, and I feel like, particularly against Protoss, you can run up with medevacs, drop a lot of troops in the back of a Protoss's base, and I think Blizzard's original counter to that was, what Protoss will do is they'll just save up a lot of resources, and they'll save up, and they'll be able to warp a lot of units in back there. But when you're talking about 2 Marauder troopings worth of medevacs, that wasn't an actual word, troopings, whatever.
I got it.
Yeah. They warp in a couple stalkers, but they die almost instantaneously. Even with the Psy Storm, it's not necessarily effective right there. And I think that's what they were trying to rely on for Protoss spread defense. But Terran just has the most mobility across the board. It seems like at every stage of the game at the moment, Terran has the mobility advantage, and I think that's really playing well. And specifically, they have the mobility advantage while still being very economically stable because of mules, so they don't really need to. They can just not use their orbital command center for a while, take an expansion, drop a bunch of mules, and all of a sudden their economy's fine. And on top of that, between bunkers and planetary fortresses, they can go out, run around, attack all over the place, and their opponents can't really go and counterattack very effectively. They don't have the same sort of options in that regard. And I think once those things are taken care of, then I don't know how that balance will work out. I think the best way to do it is to just nerf the mule a bit, and either have it cost more energy, have other units that force comsats more, have that play a bigger role. So, make Dark Templar come in a little bit faster in the game, or even like Cloaked Zerg units, have that come in a lot faster, and make the Raven a little bit higher tier. So basically you can't get Ravens as quickly, and you have to expend comsats, or at least save the comsats rather than constantly expending them, sort of thing. I think that would be, and so you actually have to build harvesters. It feels like basically currently Terran's the most forgiving, and you can be the most aggressive with them across the board, and that is what's really leading to a lot of their success. But at the same time, I think, yeah, Blizzard's tentatively waiting and looking for people to come up with build order solutions rather than patch balance solutions. And I think that's really what they're keeping their eye on. And honestly, that's an impossible job. I do not envy them in that regard, where they're more or less trying to create a game that will have a rotation of metagame. And you can't have that if you're constantly solving the players' complaints by just, nerfing something or strengthening something. So we'll see.
Yeah, definitely, and I think they are aware of that. I think Dustin Broder and others have said quite clearly in other more eloquent words, but basically that the masses do not understand game balance. We listen to them, but we do not, and that's my phone again, we do not follow their bidding, because that will end up with a very patched game, not in that good sense. That isn't really good for anyone. And Brood War was imbalanced in many ways originally, but in the end people had made a science out of it, and there were ways to counter everything with sufficient skill. And I don't know, I'm optimistic, but as a low-level Terran player myself, I definitely recognize what you're saying. It's easy to get away with things, but then again I play at a fairly low level myself. But I'd love to have Day 9 on the show and really dig into this issue with him, because I think many people will recognize what you're saying. But we'll see. So far they haven't made too drastic changes in any patches, though they added some nice new icons, and that building bar in the unit production tab as well in the latest patch. I really like that one. I've been thinking of them putting that in ever since the beta. It's a really good addition, I think.
Yeah,
makes commentating easier also, I would imagine.
I'm still exploring all the commentating tools. I feel like that's actually been another challenge to the commentary, and feel like where I'm getting better is just messing around with like a little bit of the follow, knowing when to put on the production tab. Actually recently in the Girl Power versus who I'm told is actually Winhouse, so I need to actually correct his name in the next commentary. I'll probably leave the title the same, but say, hey, that's actually Winhouse. But there was a moment where it was like, oh, the numbers are reducing, and I was trying to desperately pull up the unit tab to show that, hey, the number of Marines is going from 6 to 5 to 4 to 3, and I think I failed to do so. And I was like, shoot. And that's one of those things where I was like, if I get better at that in the future, it'll be more entertaining as a commentary thing. I love the production tab. That is probably my favorite tab, as well as the income tab, so you can actually physically see. And I think that's also when you're talking about the balance things, that's the one thing that gets aggravating as a commentator, where you'll see a Protoss or a Zerg that has twice the harvester count of their opponent, and yet their income is the same. Comparatively, just because of the mules out on the field. That does become like, I think that's my 2 cents as a commentator. I'm not an extremely high level player, so they could probably commentate more, or they could probably mention or talk about balance a little bit more accurately. I'm not sure, with a little bit more insight than I can, but nevertheless, those are my thoughts. Love the commentator tools, though.
It's a great addition. But this interview is also closing in on its 40th minute, so I thought we could round things off. But before, of course, as an old-school scholar of StarCraft, I would like to have your predictions for the future about the scene and the game, and also any announcements or teasers, perhaps, about what will be coming out of the Diggity machine in the coming months.